This episode of Decoding TV is brought to you by McDonald's. McDonald's, I'm loving it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Decoding TV, a podcast about television. I am David Chen.
And I am Roxana Hadadi.
Welcome to the podcast. On today's episode of Decoding TV, we are going to be reviewing, discussing, recapping, analyzing Season 2, Episode 3 of The White Lotus, entitled Bull Elephants. We will not spoil anything from future week's episodes. That includes anything on the Next Time on Preview, anything else that we may or may not have watched. You can find more episodes of this podcast at podcast.decodingtv.com. You can email us at decodingtv@gmail.com. You can find us on TikTok, Twitter, YouTube at decodingtv. Roxana, one of the great things about doing a podcast such as this is we got some really awesome, thoughtful feedback from folks. So we got some follow-ups from previous episodes we want to discuss. Why don't we start with Jen's email? And do let us know where you're writing in from, folks. But Jen writes into decodingtv@gmail.com about the Harper storyline. She writes, quote, Harper seems to have an intimate and trusting relationship with her husband. Why is it on the rocks right now? I started thinking about what it would be like if out of nowhere my husband suddenly became much richer than me and the bottom fell out of my stomach. I'm a female lawyer in my mid-30s. I have a wonderful husband. We both make about the same amount of okay middle-class money. We make decisions together, respect each other's needs, and treat each other as equals. Looking back, I think I made a lot of choices because I wanted a financially egalitarian marriage, a lot of life choices. While both my parents worked full-time because my dad made more money, it was tacitly accepted that he was entitled to choose what city he and my mom lived in, what friends they had, what church they went to. I think this profoundly impacted my mom's life for the worse. And for whatever it's worth, I think a lot of millennial women like me chose not just a career, but also a partner with the goal of avoiding the trap my mom fell into. Guys who flaunt lots of money have always made me feel queasy. So putting myself in Harper's shoes, I actually find the messy antagonism we see bubbling up in her behavior very sympathetic. Working hard to become an accomplished professional woman, only to see your income suddenly dwarfed by your husband's, would be very difficult to navigate. The fact that she works in a field which often deals with gendered income equality doesn't seem like an accident. And even though in their conversations Ethan seems caring and respectful, the money seems to be impacting his expectations of Harper in disturbing ways. He's taking her on this lavish vacation, and in return she's now supposed to humor this pig of an ex-roommate who insults her life's work and flashes his dick at her? No wonder she's looking for ways, albeit imperfect ones, to assert control in the marriage. Viewed through that lens, the dinner scene in season 2, episode 1, is really sad and sinister. They're making a shared decision what to order, and Harper emphatically states what she wants, but then Ethan suggests fish, something Harper doesn't like. And when Harper registers the disapproval of Cam and his dutiful, obedient wife, rather than sticking up for what she wants or finding a compromise, she does the thing that beholden wives are expected to do in this new milieu and defers to her husband's wishes. I don't know where Harper's storyline is headed, and I'm not super confident in the show's capacity for insight on gender politics. The last season seems strangely fixated on a distaste for women who hold the purse strings and their emasculated husbands/sons/lovers. But it's interesting to see this kind of dynamic in a millennial marriage explored. I look forward to enjoying more of your thoughts on the show as the season unfolds. End quote. Roxana, what do you think of this email?
I mean, it's very thoughtful. I mean,
Yes.
really, really went through the whole range of that relationship. And I think that I am a little caught up on whether this behavior is new for Harper and Ethan.
Yes.
Like how much the money has either exacerbated tensions that were already there, or that has just completely created a new dynamic. I don't know if we know enough about them yet to know that. And I think something that's sort of hard for me to wrap my mind around is Harper doesn't seem like somebody who derives her value from money. So I think sort of understanding whether she is making these choices now because Ethan has so much more money, I just don't know if we have all the details for that yet. But I do think that that sort of lens complicates my assuming that Harper is just being passive aggressive. I do think the money aspect of it does sort of complicate it perhaps a little bit more, because I just accepted that they had the money and that the money wasn't necessarily an issue. I thought Cam's presence and who he made Ethan sort of revert to was the issue. So I think it could just be that we're like each zoning in on different aspects of the relationship.
I completely agree with you, Roxana. I think it's a super thoughtful email, and
Yeah.
if that is your interpretation, great. Like, no, I do
Yeah.
not begrudge you that interpretation. It's not my interpretation. Like, I don't
Yeah.
think that the money is a. I don't think we are meant to assume that the money is a big factor in Harper and Ethan's relationship at this point.
Yeah.
Maybe it will become that in the future, but at this moment, I don't think we have enough textual evidence to make that conclusion. I do think we're supposed to believe that it is on the rocks, though, that there are
Mhm.
troubling aspects about it. But I don't sense that those are derived from the money. I feel like, if anything, the money has helped with their relationship from what
Mhm.
we found in episode 2. So those are my thoughts, but we really appreciate the email, Jen, and please keep writing in to decodingtv@gmail.com with your thoughts. Ron from Los Angeles, California writes in to decodingtv@gmail.com uh, about my comments at the end of season 2, episode 1, about that scene where Dominic has sex with with Lucia, right?
Mhm.
He says, quote, regarding your sense that the show had a conservative, maybe even judgmental gaze at the hookup between Dominic and Lucia, I agree we're supposed to look at it with judgment, but not as an indictment of sex work. Rather, the disingenuousness of Dominic. He tries to tell his wife he still cares for her and he wants to make amends. Yet we learn that he obviously ordered Lucia's service well in advance. And how repentant can he really be if he's having sex with a hooker in the room right next to his son? I think it's a safe bet that sex and relationships will play a huge role in storylines this season. I'd love to hear your other Gottman-related observations on how the characters interact with each other. You could make a whole segment on the show, LOL. Keep up the great work, end quote. This is a great email. I think it makes way more sense. Like, the first episode and the final sequence makes way more sense now
Mhm.
after like the events of the last couple episodes. So I appreciate this thing about Ron, this message from Ron. And I also had another Gottman observation to point out that I meant to point it out last week. I didn't. And I wanted to bring it up this week. For those who don't recall, the Gottmans are a legendary pair of uh, marriage/relationship counselors, and their techniques and their insights are well known throughout the therapy psychology industry. And one of their observations is that fighting in a marriage or a relationship is normal.
Mhm.
Um, and arguably, no fighting can be a red flag. The most important thing about a fight is how you resolve it. And that came to mind because last week we learned that Cam and Daphne basically don't fight. And I meant to bring this up, like, oh, that's actually a bad sign. And I think we learned definitively this episode that it
It's not great.
definitely
It's pretty
papers over
bad.
some other things. Yeah. So anyway, before we move on from emails, Roxanne, I just wanted to see if you had anything else to say about any of the topics we've discussed so far.
I don't think so. I mean, I'm really excited to get this sort of feedback and to sort of be able to incorporate it into our conversations. So keep it coming.
Yeah, decodingtv@gmail.com. Or you can also comment at youtube.com/decodingtv. We'll look at those as well. Okay, Roxana, let's get to season 2, episode 3, Bull Elephants. Before we even get to overall thoughts, what I want to know is, last week I proposed a theory whereby it's not the most insightful, groundbreaking theory, but I just basically said, hey, I think that when the person's name, the actor's name, appears on screen during the opening credits, it is meant to provide some kind of indication of what kind of person they are in the
Mhm.
show. And you did not notice that as of last week, but then you took a look this week, and I am so curious. Do you agree that what I was saying is true?
Yeah. I mean, I was very intentional this time around. I paused. I made
Mm-hmm.
sure to, check it out. I do think you're right. I think that some of the names are a little more dramatic than others. Like Theo James, when his name pops up, we see a statue with very small genitalia. And I believe Aubrey Plaza's is a bird pecking another bird. So they're
Yeah,
really intentional and deliberate.
yeah. No name when woman having sex with goose though. So
Yeah, which
I
is
took
really unfortunate.
I looked
I
out for that. Yeah,
I really wanted something there. But yeah,
yeah,
I mean, I
yeah.
think that's clever. I also, you bringing it up and me watching it brought back some vague memory of, I think the first season credits did this also,
Mm.
because I seem to have some memory of when Steve Zahn's name came up. I think we saw rotting fruit that looked
Mm,
very much like testicles.
I see. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, well there you go. So
Yeah.
it's not new.
It's not
But
new, but it's, it's a
it's
theme.
fun. It's fun to watch it and like imagine what they were trying to communicate with the painting,
Yes.
basically. So
And I think then it benefits from noticing it like the second or the third episode once those characterizations are in play and you can sort of put the pieces together.
all right, let's talk about overall thoughts on season 2, episode 3. What'd you think, Roxana?
So much happened in this episode. I
I
think that
know.
this
Forget
this
about what we said before about like, oh, they're just table setting and just getting ready.
yeah,
We cannot make that complaint anymore, Roxana. Like, there is a lot going on. But
I
yeah,
think
go
there's a
ahead.
lot going on. I mean, there's a lot going on with the Harper, Ethan, Cam, Daphne foursome. And I think in this episode we got a lot of the hidden layers of those relationships, at least for Cam and Daphne. I'm not sure if we still know who Harper and Ethan are
Hmm.
outside of this trip, but we certainly learn who Cam and Daphne are outside of this trip. And it's sort of sad. It actually like made me a little upset at a few different moments. And then yes, we get the Tanya Greg drama, and I think a little bit of a sneak peek as to where Tanya's story could go, sort of like some gingerbread crumbs about what could be next. But yeah, this felt like a lot of the things that we had seen in the first two episodes sort of looping together, and an attack on The Godfather, the best movie ever made. That, I hate Alby forever now. So that was fun.
Hmm. Hmm.
What about you? What
Interesting.
did you think?
I liked it. Yeah, I mean, a lot going on, and I think we're really like this episode feels like it's setting up basically the conflicts for the rest of the season. Like this,
Yeah.
this feels like we're going to spend the rest of the season dealing with what happened this episode. That's kind of what it feels like to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like probably one of the more eventful episodes. So I liked it a lot. A lot of interesting things that I think the show's trying to say, right? And one of them being relationships that look good on the outside can often have like a darker, seedier, hidden side to them, right?
Sure.
And I think we all know that implicitly, but like to see it illustrated so vividly is something that the show can give us. So I liked it. I thought it was really intense, shocking, upsetting episode. So
There is there is something that I am beginning to worry about, but I think we can talk about it at the end of the episode.
okay, all right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll try to make a note of the thing that you Roxana is starting to worry about. Let us start with Bert and Dom and Alby and kind of Porsha. It's morning after Dom has had a night of partying. He has woken up with Lucia next to him in bed. Mia's on the couch.
Mhm.
We learn that Mia didn't sleep with Dom, but Lucia did. And he hustles the women out of the room. He pays them, but not before Bert is able to see them in the
Yeah,
hallway.
Bert notices.
Yeah, he notices. And also understands them to be prostitutes and interrogates Dom about it. And Dom's like,
Right.
hey, do me a favor. Please don't tell Alby about it because he's trying to prove to Alby that he's not a piece of shit.
Trying
So
hard.
really, really needs his help there. So we learn that Bert booked a Godfather related day tour with shooting locations from when Michael Corleone was in Sicily and fell in love with Apollonia. They invite Portia along, and there is a tension because Portia has said that she wants Alby to be a little bit more aggressive in his courting of her, and Alby is like, "You're coming along. That's me being more aggressive." And I guess she was like, I felt her thinking in her head, "Okay, but not like that." But I don't
Yeah.
know. Anyway, so they go on this tour, and I really appreciated that what the show did in the visual language of the show because um, the show wanted to show you a clip from The Godfather. But there's no way for the show to cut away to a clip from The Godfather in universe because that wouldn't make any sense. It's not a documentary, it's not whatever. So what they did is they go to like the gift shop or whatever at this location and they show two random strangers watching the TV which just happens to be playing The Godfather. And I was like, wow, that is a really creative way of showing Godfather B-roll in this TV show. So bravo show, you found a workaround to get the Godfather footage in there. A conversation ensues about uh, the, let's say, differences in which in the ways in which Gen Z and older generations perceive gender roles. That's how,
Mm-hmm.
probably the most innocuous way I can put it. With Bert and Dom very much being, let's say, old school misogynists, and Alby
Oh
trying to,
no,
okay, okay,
no,
all right, and Alby
no.
trying to put forward a more egalitarian vision of what a relationship can be. Okay, but man, Roxana is really like on the anti-Alby train. But go
I
ahead. What
am.
are your? Yes,
I
okay,
I
go ahead.
am I am defending these poor old men who need my
Oh my
defending.
god. Oh
No,
my god.
I just think that Albie I just don't like that Albie attacks the Godfather to do this. That's really my
Hmm.
problem with this entire conversation. Because I think, okay, because to sort of go back to what we were talking about in preceding episodes, I think Albie is very consumed with how things look or how things seem. So sometimes I think that he just has this superficial reading of, well, X is this one thing because people perceive it to be this one thing. So I just think that Albie could dig a little deeper in his media literacy. That's all I'm saying. I'm contractually obligated to defend The Godfather at all times. All the
Wow.
time.
I,
Yeah.
I do think there is this trend online these days of people saying, "Oh my gosh, do you know how problematic John Wayne was?"
Yes.
You know, and it's like,
Yes.
okay, like, yes, thank
Yeah.
you.
I
It was
do
a
know that
different.
actually. Yes.
It's
I
like
mean,
it was a different.
it's Scorsese going viral like every 2 months because people are
Hmm.
like he only made gangster movies, right? So I imagine Albie in like a film course
Hmm.
seminar talking
Hmm.
about how we really should reconsider our societal appreciation of Martin Scorsese. And I hate that person, so I'm sorry. But yeah. But you are right that this is a larger, I mean, we're sort of using The Godfather for this larger conversation about what men expect, what Albie thinks men expect. And so he is sort of looking to Bert and he is looking to Dom and he is saying, you know, yes, you two were married, but you thought your wives would provide for you and you could do whatever you wanted because you brought home more money. So there is this discussion again happening as to who holds the power in a relationship. Is it financial? Is it by some other currency with which we use, you know, in relationships to sort of balance out the scales or whatever. So I think Albie is sort of taking this financial point of view. And I think Bert and Dom are sort of sidestepping the question and saying, well, what do you want to do with like men like us? Do you throw us away? Like what happens? And season one did this too, right? I mean, again, like Connie Britton's character in season one was asking, like, okay, she was asking Olivia, like, if you don't like your father or if you don't have hope for your younger brother, what happens to those men? What do you do? And I think this season is again hammering that home within the three generations of this family.
Totally. I didn't find anything really objectionable what Albie had to say, other than this, other than that it kind of fits into this trend of critique that's like, did you know old thing problematic? And it's like, okay,
Yes.
yes, but like it was made at a different time under a different context, and it's not super useful to observe that social mores change over time. So.
Right.
But other than that, I thought he was right. He said, I think you have the quote here, right? Men love The Godfather because they feel emasculated by modern society. It's a fantasy about a time when they could go out and solve their problems with violence and sleep with every woman and come home to their wife who doesn't ask them any question and makes them pasta. End quote.
Okay, first of all, that's an incorrect read of the film because not everyone in that film cheats on their wife. So that's just wrong. I mean, like,
Yes,
watch
I
the
mean,
movie.
I will grant you
That's
that. I will grant you
that's
that.
incorrect. Second of all, Clemenza makes the sauce and the pasta. So again, I mean, Albie, watch the film. Yeah, I mean, I
I am
think
begging you to watch The
I
Godfather,
am
Albie.
begging you to watch the movie.
I'm
But yeah, I
begging you to
mean,
watch the
again,
movie.
this is like the Goodfellas conversation. This is the Fight
Hmm.
Club conversation. This is the this thing is doing this thing and I don't like it. It's sort of a refusal. Okay, here's what I'll say. I think for Albie, it is a refusal to look inward, right? It's just the surface of this thing bothers me or offends me. And because this thing is bothersome and offensive, I don't think I can be part of that, right? Like, surely I wouldn't be doing these behaviors that I find objectionable in other people. So I just think it's a little bit of a tell for us, especially in his relationship with Porsha, how Alby views himself. Again, and we know this, he thinks he's a nice guy. So I just think it's of a type with that sort of read of himself that we're getting. And I mean, again, like, I love F. Murray Abraham and his line readings because I like they used to respect the old. Now we're just reminders of an offensive past everybody wants to forget. Again, speaking to what do you do with us then? Like, is there any hope for the old white man?
Yeah, and I don't think season 1 really had an answer for that question,
No,
and I don't know that season 2 will either.
no.
But it's
Who knows?
certainly
I mean, we
referring
don't
to it.
know.
Yeah, we don't know.
Yeah,
We'll see. We'll see.
yeah.
Maybe Mike White has developed kind of his opinion on that.
His
Um,
theory,
I,
his new Chuck Palahniuk style theory.
I'm just gonna say I think Alby's heart is in the right place, and he chose the wrong movie to apply his thoughts to. Okay, if he'd chosen like some '80s movies,
Sure. Yeah.
I would have been much more supportive. But I
If
would
my
agree
man
with
was
you.
talking about like weird science, I'd be like, you know what,
Yes.
Alby, you have a
Oh
point.
yes. Totally.
John Hughes's gaze was a
Yes.
little bad,
Don't go
but
after the Godfather though.
don't
So
come
anyway.
for Francis Ford Coppola. Like,
Yes.
that's not good. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Porsha is whisked away. We'll talk about her in a little bit. But anyway, they
Mm-hmm.
go back to the White Lotus, and Dom. It's very important to Dom that Alby thinks okay of him. He actually puts Alby in like a terrible situation. He's like, "Your mom listens to you. Tell
Yeah.
her that I'm sorry." And it's like, dude, like that's awful. Like what to ask a kid to do that, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and then Dom makes the point that he's always supported women. He's a feminist, and Alby's mom's a feminist. So problem solved.
Here's an important question that, again, I don't know if the White Lotus has an answer for. Is it feminist to employ sex workers?
I think okay. I think this is a good question, right? Like, is it inherently misogynistic
Right.
or whatever to um, pay for the service of sex workers? And I think that in the context of Dominic, the answer is that it is not good for him because
Mm-hmm.
of his sex addiction or because it will cause him to spiral in other ways. So, in a way, I don't know that we are done. We have the totality of what the show's views on sex work are yet.
Right.
But I think in the context of Dominic, um, it is very reasonable, and I don't think an objectionable point of view to understand that it's not a good idea for Dom to have sex workers in his room every night,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not the kind of image he wants to project for his son, and it is also bad for him physically and for his dependency issues, right? So that's kind of where I feel like it's coming down on in
Mm-hmm.
terms of just Dawn's circumstance specifically. But what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think this is complicated, and I don't know if I have an answer either. I mean, I think my read of the show sort of presenting it as shameful is because I think that we see how much his relationships with other women hurt his family and hurt his
Mm-hmm.
wife. So I think we're operating from this basis of Dom doing these things is harmful to someone else. So I think there's that on the one hand. And then I think on the other hand, with the sex workers themselves, and we can talk about this more later on, I think that they too are sort of presented as complicated by this, not sure if they want to keep doing it. Like, Mia is
Right.
so offended, right? In the preceding episode
Yeah.
when the piano player thought she was a prostitute. So I just think that I don't know if the show has figured out a way to show these young women as empowered. I
Right.
think that we're still sort of operating within this framework where sex work is something that should be hidden or looked down upon or even scandalous. I mean, I think of how like Cam reacts when he sees them, right? It's sort of like a nudge nudge, like, look at those hookers, right? Like, he calls them hookers. Like, it's not, he doesn't see it as something that is these women in business for themselves and sort of making their own choices, he sees them as people he can take advantage of. So I'm not sure, depiction is not endorsement, of course, but I just don't know if the show depicting these men sort of, I don't want to say praying, but these men sort of being able to um, like divest themselves from these women at will. I don't know
Hmm.
if the show has figured out a way to present that doesn't inherently seem like the women are also being insulted. Maybe
Yeah.
that's too thinky, but I'm not
Maybe,
sure that the
yeah. I
show
mean,
has figured it out.
my guess is where it's going is like because we have spent so much time with Mia and Lucia, like
Mhm.
they're going to try to spin it as like a kind of uh, means towards empowerment to some degree. Is my guess as to where it's going, but I don't know. I
Maybe?
don't know. We're
Yeah, I
only
don't
three
know.
episodes into 7 episode season, so
Right. And we
um,
don't get as much time with them as we get with everybody else, like on their own.
in general. We
Yeah.
got like a bunch of time in episode 1, but less time
Mhm.
in this episode. So and episode 2. Okay. Um, let's talk briefly about Porsha. She's whisked back to the White Lotus and has to engage with Tanya. We'll talk a little bit more about Tanya later, but there's a scene at the
Well,
end of the episode where I mean, Tanya basically says to Portia, "Don't get involved with emotionally unavailable men." I think it's a
yes.
comment like Portia is complaining about Alby, like, "Oh, he's a little too nice, right? Isn't he too nice?" And then Tanya's like, "Don't get involved with emotionally unavailable men." I took that to mean it's okay if they're nice. Like, you don't want the bad
Yes.
boys. That was kind of what I
Yes.
interpret that as, right?
I thought it was sort of ambiguous, but I did think Tanya was telling her, you'll waste time with someone who doesn't tell you what they want. Alby doesn't light Portia on fire, but he wants to spend time with her. He wanted to kiss her. Like he is present in a
Yes.
way that I think Tanya thinks at this point Greg is not.
There's a scene by the pool where Portia's hanging out by the pool. I think we are meant to assume that she's attracted to this guy who's pretty buff,
The random guy at the pool.
random guy at the pool.
Yeah.
Albie comes and he's like, "Hey, do you want to hang out?" And she's like, "No, I'm good." And he's like, "Well, I'll walk you back to your room then." And she's like, "Okay," but she really wanted to stick around and hit on this guy, I
Keeps
think.
looking back
Right?
at pool guy. I think she looks
Right?
back at pool guy like twice.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. So
Yeah.
and that's kind of where that plot line wraps up. So it doesn't seem like I have no idea who Pool Guy is. Maybe Pool Guy is the most present, nice person in the world, but so far it doesn't seem like she's following Tanya's advice.
Does pool guy look like the most present, nice guy in the world? Like,
Look,
no
I don't
offense to pool
judge.
guy.
I don't judge based on. I mean, he has a very nicely sculpted body. I mean,
Pool
I
guy
don't
is very
judge.
tattooed. Pool guy is very rakish. I have a long history of being attracted to troublemaking pool guys, and he
Hmm.
seems like a troublemaking pool guy.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Well,
This man looks like I think, don't the UK have like those like footballer wives shows? He looks like one of the
mm,
footballers. That's the
mm,
read that I'm getting.
okay. Well, um, we'll see how it all plays out. But for now, it doesn't seem like Portia's that into Alby,
No,
unfortunately. So,
no.
and curious to see what conflicts that might generate in the future. So, that is the Bert Dom Alby storyline along with Portia. Let's take a break and talk about our sponsor. This episode of Decoding TV is brought to you by McDonald's, proudly serving communities since 1965. And it's no surprise here at Decoding TV, we absolutely love the idea of community. Over the last decade, I have really worked hard to build communities of people who love pop culture, who love TV, who love movies, and who can watch these shows together collectively, bond over them by listening to the podcast and in the comments at our website, and so on and so forth. And it's really been a great time, and we're already starting to see it with this show, with some of the feedback we got even on the last couple of episodes over at decodingtv@gmail.com. So I'm really proud and excited for Decoding TV to partner with McDonald's because McDonald's truly cares about fostering a sense of community through their incredible crew members. McDonald's crew members work hard to make you feel like you're right at home when you stop into a McDonald's. Whenever I go to a McDonald's, I have one right down the street. I literally went today. McDonald's. Okay. And you know why I went to McDonald's, Roxana, is because the McRib is having a farewell party.
Okay, but
This is going to be one of the final times that the McRib is available, apparently.
one of the final
And
times.
I
Okay.
mean, I'm just going by what it says in the McDonald's app,
Sure.
which I check
The
every day.
McRib
So
is delicious, so
it is.
I agree.
Literally went today to get a McRib. And when you go to McDonald's, at least at my local one, I'm always impressed by how fast and friendly the crew members are. I get my food quickly with a smile, and it's been a real comfort for me over the course of the last couple of years. So whether you know that one crew member who always remembers that you like your Big Mac with an extra pickle, or the crew member who always greets you in the drive-thru with a warm smile, thank you, McDonald's crew members everywhere, for making our McDonald's visits even more special. McDonald's, I'm loving it. Thanks to McDonald's for sponsoring Decoding TV. Okay.
Can I ask a question about the McRib?
Yes, please.
Does it come with pickles or could you
It
add pickles?
does. It came with pickles and onions.
Okay. I would add
Yeah.
more pickles. This is
Yeah,
very
yeah.
important.
Yeah. It had a good number of pickles on it. So anyway.
It's delicious.
All right, let's move on. So one other storyline we mentioned was Tanya and Greg. We talked last week about how Greg is possibly cheating. We don't know exactly what's going on.
He's at least lying.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
He's at least
but
lying.
they have a very tense confrontation at breakfast, and more feelings come out, and we kind of learn a little bit more about the stuff that happened in the time since last season, right?
Yeah.
Tanya helped Greg to get some doctors, and Greg got better. That's why they're not talking about Greg dying all the time.
Right.
And Tanya offers, like, hey, do you want me to get rid of the prenup? And Greg's like, no, Greg acknowledges that he has had issues in his love life as well. He has been married 4 times, a fact that really upsets Tanya because the 4th time is with Tanya. So you don't talk about it like that unless it's in the past tense generally.
Yeah.
So it's pretty sad. And then he gets up and kind of goes away. And that's when Tanya descends into depression and calls Porsha to come back with her. Any thoughts on the Tanya-Greg confrontation?
Well, I thought that it again sort of brought up this question of money. I mean, I think we sort of knew. Well, we do know that Tanya is worth what, like $500 million. I mean, she's worth an exceptional amount of money. We knew that Greg was not worth that. He's what, like a federal worker. But I thought again, this sort of sense of, well, I paid for this thing for you. I don't want to say in happy relationships that stuff doesn't matter, but sort of in happy relationships that stuff doesn't matter. But it seems like it is a bargaining chip here, right? I mean, I think did Greg marry her for access to that, or was that sort of a beneficial thing that happened in the time that they were married? I don't know. But again, that sense of, did Tanya save this man's life and now he's lying to her and leaving her? That's all really messy. And I think, again, sort of gets to that point of what is a true partnership, and sort of what do you offer to each other in a true partnership? And if you're keeping score, doesn't that inherently mean something is bad and something is off? And all
and
of
how
the
does
couples are keeping
money
score.
how does money complexify a partnership too? I think is kind of what we're seeing with this storyline, as well as with the Ethan Harper storyline, So but yeah, it's complicated, and Greg leaves. We don't find out exactly who Greg is going to or what he's doing, but Tanya hires a fortune teller. The fortune teller basically says exactly what we as the audience think might be going on, which is that Greg is cheating on her. And Tanya dismisses the fortune teller because she's like, you're too negative, and it goes really poorly. That night at dinner, an actor that has been in, I think, top billed status in the opening credits finally appears for like 5 seconds.
Yes.
Tom Hollander is one of like the top billed actors on the show, and I don't even think we've glimpsed him in the first 2 episodes. Maybe he's been in the background for like I don't know, but certainly I don't recall. And he appears at the end of this episode. He's looking at Tanya, smiling at Tanya, kind of flirting with Tanya. He and his table of dudes are doing so. And I'm like, okay, I'm really curious what Tom Hollander is doing in this show, because super talented guy, can play a scumbag very, very well. So I'm curious to see where that's going. Any other thoughts on the Tanya storyline, Roxana?
Just that I thought that it was very effective to make me feel very sorry for Tanya in this horrible breakfast confrontation where Greg basically tells her he's ashamed of her, right? I mean, Greg again is like very contemptuous and resentful, and I felt so bad. And then in the next scene, for her to have this like horrible American view of a fortune teller and use terms that, like, for example, the Roma do not use to describe themselves, just to have the 180 of me feeling badly for Tanya as
Yeah.
a person who is clearly going through something very troubling and upsetting. And then immediately me hating Tanya for being the stereotype of the rich, white, American woman. That was really well done. I appreciated that emotional gamut.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And that's something that the show's pretty good at. I think is
Yeah.
taking you all the way from like sympathy to hatred within a few moments. That's one of the things I like about the show. So that's the Tanya Greg storyline this
Hmm.
episode. Now let's get to the main meat of it.
There's so much.
Harper and Ethan, Daphne and Cam, and then Ethan, Cam, Harper and Daphne, right?
Right.
So Harper tries to seduce Ethan the next morning. We see Ethan kind of in an opening shot. He's going on his run, and Harper tries to, dress sexily and pose in bed. But Ethan really not picking up what she's putting down. And at this point, Harper's like, you know what? I'm going to be so fun. I'm going to be so agreeable. I'm not going to be a shrew anymore.
Right.
Like, I'm going to be the fun person that you want me to be.
I'm not going to be
Which
the
is
pecking bird from the opening credits.
which is amazing because you just know that Harper is going to get into situations that what I this is my like Aubrey Plaza MVP throughout this whole episode in my opinion because
Hmm.
it is very difficult in my opinion to play somebody who is pretending to be okay with everything.
Yes.
She's playing someone who is okay with everything, but you know that deep down she is not. There's a
Hmm.
lot of subtlety in that performance that I think comes out through Aubrey Plaza's facial expressions. And it's hard. It's like a very thin line to
Hmm.
walk. And I think she does a great job of it. But yeah, she's like, I'm going to have fun. Everything's going to be great.
That's sort
We'll
of the
see how
Aubrey
well that goes.
Plaza like special, though. I think that
Hmm.
that sort of character, the layers of performance is what she does well. I mean, Ingrid Goes West, she does that. I don't know if you saw Black Bear. That's the movie where she's playing an actress, sort of playing herself, playing an actress. It's
Hmm.
very meta layered. But Aubrey Plaza is great at this. This sort of purposeful facetiousness is one of her go tos.
Indeed. So at breakfast, Daphne says that she wants to go to Noto, a Baroque style town in Sicily, but Cam wants to go jet skiing. So there's a conflict, and Daphne basically says, "Okay, fine, I'll go to Noto myself. Like, I'll
Right.
just do it myself. I don't need Cam to come along." And then she invites Harper to go along with them, and Ethan kind of encourages it because maybe he thinks it'll be fun for both parties if this is how it goes. So
Did you actually think he thought that?
Um, no, probably,
I
probably
sort
he
of felt
just,
like it
probably he
felt like
just
a
wanted to like do something fun with Cam. That's probably what he
yes.
wanted
It
to do.
felt like
Yes.
sort of volunteering someone who had been irritating him. Like, yeah, you go do that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, fair
Yeah.
enough. So Ethan and Cam hang out.
Yes.
They start drinking, and then the truth start dropping. Right, we learn exactly why it is Cam wanted Ethan to come on this trip.
Mhm.
Cam is proud that Ethan has made a lot of money, but he's disappointed that Ethan didn't tip him off about the sale of his company because until it was too late for Cam
Right.
to do anything.
Right.
Now, what he's referring to is insider trading,
Yes. Yeah, very
and
casually.
very casually,
Very
and
casually. Yeah.
it's fun to see like Ethan kind of realize what's going on because he's like, well, that's illegal, like
Right.
and he understands like how over the line Cam is. I want to tell you. Let me ask you a question. Are you a full time employee at Vulture? Is that
Mhm.
is that okay? Yeah, you're a full time employee.
Mhm.
When you became a full time employee, did they make you watch any training videos?
I honestly don't remember. I don't think so.
Okay, well, I've been a full time employee at corporations such as Microsoft and Amazon,
Mhm.
and I had to watch a lot of training videos, Roxana.
Sure.
Because these are uh, multi-billion-dollar conglomerates, and there's many ways they like you to do things, and
Right.
they want to make sure that you have an understanding of what those are. One of the most vivid videos I've ever seen in my life was a Microsoft insider trading video.
Oh my god.
And basically what they did for this trading video was they interviewed a guy who had done insider trading. Like what he had worked at Microsoft, and he had like tipped some friends off, and they had made like hundreds of thousands of dollars from some Microsoft news before it like went live. And it was an interview with the guy, and basically he's like, yeah, I lost my job. I went to jail for several years. I like basically can't be employed. Like I had a great career. I was making a lot of money, and now it's all gone, you know? And I was like, wow, I can't believe they got this guy to like talk about it for Microsoft. But maybe it was like his way of atoning for, what he had done. But for me, it was just like, oh wow, like that's not something I ever want to do, because there's
Yeah.
nothing, the risk is so like if you are in a position where you can be insider trading, where you can either know the information or take advantage of the information, you're making a lot of money already.
Sure.
You are not doing badly, right? Why risk it all to make just a tiny bit more money? It doesn't make
Mhm.
any sense to me, right? The downside is so catastrophic. And all you got to do is just not do illegal
Just
things.
don't.
Now,
Just
I
don't do the insider trading.
I don't come from this culture, like, so maybe there's like, I'm sure there's like millions or thousands of cams out there that do this stuff all the
I'm
time.
sure.
But like,
Yeah.
but from what I saw, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. And so
I have
when
two
Cam was
I have two
when Cam was
questions.
saying this, like, you should have just told me the information. I could have done something. Like alarm bells are screaming in my
Sure.
brain, like, Ethan, run, GTFO, get out of there, like, don't look back, danger, man, you're in danger. You don't, you shouldn't even be associating with this guy, you know. Um, so thank you for listening to my extremely long talk about insider trading. Uh, what were your thoughts on this whole scene?
Well, I have a question about the insider trading thing.
Yes.
Did the video show the person, or was it like a 48 hours where like they're in like a silhouette and like their
No, it
voice is
was like
through a
you saw the
vocoder?
person's face. They talked
Wow.
frankly about all the stuff they'd done. It was like it was like one of the most effective training videos I've ever seen, as evidenced by the fact that I can still recall it like many, many
Yeah.
years later. So
Okay. I
yeah.
mean, yeah, I think the reality is that this happens all the time, right? I mean, I think that was why it was a shock that Martha Stewart went to prison because this
Mm-hmm.
happens all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
Martha came out and it was fine. Like people respected Martha for doing the time. So yeah, as soon as he started talking, I was like, "Oh no. I can't believe this is what's happening." But then this conversation sort of gets a counterpart when Harper and Daphne are talking, right? So I thought it was interesting to see the variety of reactions here. Ethan is clearly shocked, right? Ethan is like, "Why would you even bring this up to me? Like I wouldn't help you." And it's clear that Cam and Ethan have not been in touch. Like they haven't maintained a
Right.
friendship.
Yeah.
So I think this is actually very manipulative and thoughtfully manipulative on Cam's part to be like, "Hey man, why didn't you tell me?" To imply that there was this sort of like
There's an
deep
expectation.
bond.
Right.
Yeah, that Ethan should have been aware of. Like it's a very thoughtful deflection from Cam. And then, later
Well,
on when we get
Cam's also like when Ethan's like, well, he Ethan eventually like tries to get out of the conversation.
right.
He's like, okay, I'm sorry about that. And he's like, and Cam's like, it's okay, next time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, F you, Cam. Like, you're such a piece of shit. Like,
Yeah.
freaking hate
Sucks.
this guy.
He
Hate this
sucks.
guy.
He
And that
sucks.
was before the end of the episode.
He sucks.
You
But
know,
here's another thing I'll say. At what point should Ethan do anything about this? Right? Ethan has sort of brushed off the fact that Cam showed his wife his dick, right? Like Ethan like brushed that off. Ethan brushes this off when I would think you should probably leave. So I also think I don't know how intentional this is on the part of the show, but I did keep thinking, why are you staying on this vacation? Why haven't you left?
first of all, you're talking to the wrong guy, Roxana, because
You
I
would have
have
stayed.
very few. No, I have very few social graces. I would have.
Mm,
I would have prevented this trip at the root and not even gone on it
not even
because
gone.
I would not believe in going on a trip with someone who I don't know that well. Like in this
Yeah.
situation, I barely will go on trips with people I know.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to go on trips with someone I don't know or who thinks they're my friend who's going to be a poser or phony or whatever. Like, that's
But
just not in my DNA.
don't you think this is an unanswered question from the show? Why would Ethan agree to go? And why would he stay on this trip given all of these things that Cam keeps doing that are like sort of messed up? I don't
I
know.
think, uh, yeah, I agree that we have no explicit answer as of this point. I
Yeah,
think I'll just throw out a few guesses.
sure.
Maybe Ethan is lonely.
Maybe.
He's been working hard at a startup, and things with his wife aren't going super great, and
Right.
maybe he's lonely, and so any friendship is like useful to him or good to him.
It's like a
So maybe
life
that's
raft.
yeah, it's like a life raft. Another explanation is maybe he finds like Cam and Daphne like aspirational to some degree before this trip. Like he's like,
Like
oh,
they've been
they're
living with money, they seem happy.
right.
Yeah,
Like maybe I can learn a thing or two from them about life or about money or something. So,
sure.
but yeah, I agree. There's no real clear answer yet.
Or does Ethan
So
just avoid conflict? I mean, we also potentially see that with Harper, right? Like he sort of lets her get like complaints out of her system and sort of like doesn't encourage her. So just more questions and observations to add to the Ethan Harper relationship, really.
yeah, I don't know if we talked about like the movie Speak No Evil. Did we talk about that
I don't
on this
we
episode?
yes, I think we did.
Yeah,
I think you
yeah. So
mentioned it.
Speak No Evil is about is a story about it's on Shutter, streaming right now on Shutter,
Mhm.
and um it's about this couple that has a kid, and they invite another couple with a kid out to
Right.
their house in the middle of the woods or whatever to hang out. And then as time goes on, like things are increasingly offensive, but the couple doesn't say anything or doing it. Like because I think people are inclined to avoid conflict
Sure.
and keep the peace, and maybe Ethan's just doing that. For me, I don't have any of that. I don't have I have very little of that in me, and if someone like Cam said that to me, I might not leave the trip and go home, but I would probably not talk to them again. I'd probably
Yeah.
be like, they'd be like, "Hey, you want to go to breakfast?" No, good.
Yeah.
We're just
Have
gonna get
fun
room
on your
service.
part of this trip.
Yes, exactly. Have fun on your part of this trip. Exactly right.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I guess should we talk about the Ethan Cam storyline all the way to the end?
Yeah, I
Like
think so.
basically,
I mean,
they
that's
they
sort of
go
the first tell that things are going to go bad,
they
right?
go
I
jet
mean, there's that.
skiing. Yeah,
Yeah, there's
they
that
have a
conversation.
blast. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, there's that conversation. They jet ski, right? And the jet ski becomes this: how do we work out our aggressions against each other? Sort of game of chicken, which is very beautifully shot.
Hmm.
As they're sort of churning through the water, and we get some overhead shots of them racing toward each other. And then
Well,
after that,
it's
sorry, please.
intercut. It's intercut with Daphne and Harper talking about how much it stinks to be a man and
Yes.
how it must be so lonely. And we see
Hmm.
these guys like having a blast on jet skis. And I think we can take a couple messages from it. Like number one, oh, it can be very fun and enjoyable to be a guy and to be able to do stuff like this. But maybe there's a hollowness to this kind of way of relating to each other that's very like superficial,
Well, there's like
perhaps.
an inherent competition, right?
Hmm.
I mean, they're
Yeah.
literally facing off against each other and trying to
Yeah.
see who will eventually be scared enough to veer away, which is Ethan, which is not a surprise, really. But yeah, I mean, this sort of speaks to my fear for the end of that we can talk about at the end of the episode. But yeah, so Ethan and Cam do this whole like game of chicken jet ski thing. And then I believe it's right after that that Cam is like, we should party, right? It's pretty soon after.
Yeah, yeah, and they have dinner and they
Mm-hmm.
talk about cheating, and Cam's like, everyone does it. Don't you know
Mm-hmm.
everyone does it? You should cheat. And then
Mm-hmm.
Ethan's like, I don't think so. That's not what I do. And Cam's like, oh wow, oh you sweet summer child.
Yeah. So
um,
sinister. When you played that
hmm
clip at the beginning of the episode, I was like, this is so just feels nefarious, both
hmm
in and
hmm
out of context.
Yeah, so they basically have a huge party.
Yeah.
They invite Lucy and Mia over to their place, and Ethan, you can tell, is like really torn the whole night about what to do, but he does eventually decline Mia's coming on to him,
Mhm.
and but we do see Cam is having really a lot of fun,
Yeah.
during the course of the night. So, and that's where the episode kind of ends, is with Ethan ignoring a call from his wife, and really just, I think, being like, I made a huge tiny mistake. I should have never gotten myself into this situation. That was kind of
Yeah,
my read on it. Yeah.
and why did he open the door? Right?
Hmm.
Because he was alone in his own suite and
Yeah.
they weren't there. And then he acquiesced and opened the door. So a lot of this is clearly regression back to college antics and that sort of sense of Ethan is now very, very rich and should be very, very powerful, but sort of seemingly acquiesces to whatever Cam wants to do while increasingly sort of denying what Harper wants to do. So it's this weird sort of, I don't think he's necessarily mimicking Cam, but he's also not stopping Cam from sort of like running a little roughshod all over him. So actually, I think Ethan is very fascinating, although he's sort of so quiet and the performance is
Yes.
so constrained, just because I don't understand his thinking. And I find
Hmm.
that really interesting.
He is a little bit inscrutable.
Yeah.
If I had to guess, I would say that Ethan and Harper have probably lived an extremely grounded, down to earth life until now,
Hmm.
with standard traditions and morals that many of us are familiar with. And now that Ethan is crazy rich, he wants to understand, experience how the other half lives, or at least understand it. And maybe that's why he opens the door. That's kind of how I
Right.
read it. So, anyway, um, we talked a little bit about Harper and Daphne, but basically, they go to this place, Noto, and then she's like, "Let's just rent the place." And Daphne's like, "Let's just rent the place and stay here." And
Also, I already rented it.
I already rented, and I loved, like, Harper. You could tell, like, inside she's like screaming, like she
Yeah.
really, but she's like, "No, no, 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 no! I promised that'd be fun, so I'm just gonna say yes to everything that happens, right?"
And it was
And
beautiful.
the place, yeah, the
Yeah.
place. But you could
It's
tell
beautiful.
that's not a place she would have wanted to stay. Like, that was my
No.
interpretation. Because she's like, "What about my stuff?" And she's like, "Oh, you can use my I brought this extra toothbrush." It's like, I don't want to use your extra toothbrush. Like, I have a whole like setup for when I go to sleep, Roxana.
Sure.
I'm very high maintenance, so no, you're not gonna. Everything is just red flags all up and down with like, hey, let's just spontaneously stay at this place overnight that I didn't tell you about. Um,
But that
that's a
feels
veto
really
from me.
lonely. Doesn't it feel really it feels like such an expression of loneliness from Daphne to have
Hmm.
orchestrated all of this, right? I mean, I think that Daphne is more self-aware than we are allowing her to be. And I think that she sort of knows that Harper got strong armed into this, but I think she is desperate for someone to talk to. And that sort of plays out later in the episode.
Yeah, I mean, we find out that Daphne is playing some bizarre sex game with Cam. Basically, is what's going
Did you
on,
think it
right?
was a sex game?
I mean, I'm just using that term more generically, but yes, it's she's playing some weird power game
Yeah,
with
like a
Cam.
dominance sort of mind
Yes,
game, right?
like I'm going to do the thing that I'm going to make him feel FOMO. I'm gonna like he is like the submissive to me, you know. And right there, I'm like, if it was me in this situation, I would be literally like, I'm going back to the hotel. Sorry, like goodbye. Like I'm not. I want no part of this. Whatever you guys have going on, I do not
Hmm.
want to be in the middle of it.
Okay.
Maybe that's what this show is about, Roxana. It's about people's politeness and their unwillingness to break apart from the people they're hanging out with. Because they're afraid of violating social norms. So
So we're just like Stanford prison experimenting in Sicily.
this is the White Lotus. It's the White Lotus Milgram, Stanley Milgram edition. Anyway,
I
so
guess I am more sympathetic to Daphne in this episode, and especially in those Noto scenes, because
mhm.
she seems like someone, again, sort of that Rachel. She seems to me like if Rachel, I mean, Rachel does stay with Shane, but she sort of seems to me like Rachel, like 5 to 10 years later. Like she's made a lot of
Yeah,
personal allowances to stay married, and she's doing this whole like happy facade thing, but she's clearly resentful. And I think that she's trying to figure out the ways to let out that resentment, but not in a way, not in a severe enough way to break up the marriage. So she knows there's like power inequality, right, within her relationship with Cam. But however way she has like the mind gymnastics she's done to reconcile that include simultaneously pitying him, which is where the bull elephant's name comes from. She tells a story about how elephants, like within their family units, men are kicked out and they're like forced to go be lonely. So I think she has sort of created a lot of sympathy that she feels for her husband conceptually, but in terms of the actual nitty gritty of their relationship, sort of wants to punish him. Right? I think.
Yeah, I think for me the question is, at the end she's having dialogue with Harper and she says like, I'm not a victim, right? Like,
Right.
yes, Cam cheats on me, but I'm
Yes.
not a victim. I do what I want. I get what I want out of this relationship. And she tries to
Yeah.
like shape it into like an empowering thing where she's like, it's not a guy's cheating on me. It's like I'm getting what I want out of this marriage. And
Yeah.
did you buy it, Roxana? That's the question. Is like, do you buy that she's not a victim, or
I think she buys that she believes that she's not a victim.
you
You know,
think
like
she
I
believes
think
it? But yeah, like I guess
yeah,
like there is a lot of talk in society these days about like about the concept of victimhood,
sure.
and is simply not thinking of oneself as a victim sufficient to not be a victim, right? Like, I
Right.
think that's a very reasonable point of view, right? That like
Yeah, I think
being a victim is just all about how you conceptualize it in your head.
sure.
Um,
I also think that, and this could just be my like inherent classist perspective, is sort of like how much of a victim are you if you have access to finance and funding and means of sort of making your life better or at least easier. I mean, that's probably a really terrible thing to have asked on a podcast. But I think she doesn't consider herself a victim because she knows she's rich, right? I mean, look at all the stuff that she can do. So I think if she is thinking of it as, well, my husband makes money and I'm going to spend his money and I'm going to spend it however I want,
yeah.
then that allows her to not consider herself a victim of what he chooses to do. And I will also say that I'm sure that there are tons of relationships that are like this, where there's sort of an implicit the other person, each of us does what we want. We're not going to get divorced. We have means, and it is what it is. I don't know how much the agreement is voiced here. I think the problem again is like Dom lying to himself about wanting to get better and sort of like his cheating hurting his family. I think if we had a sense that Cam and Daphne, you know, had like an agreement that each of them could do whatever they wanted and like that was fine. I think that would be different than what we're seeing, which is that Cam is lying, Daphne is playing like power games, and each of them refuses to sort of see themselves as an abuser or a victim, respectively.
Yeah, those are all fair points. I do think the money plays a huge role in it, and the idea
Of
that
course.
she's extracting financial value out of the arrangement, it like limits her capacity to be a victim to some degree. But we've seen tons of situations like I think there's just many situations where people can still be victimized in profound ways, even if they are even if they are rich, right? And certainly, I think that's one of the theses of the show in general. So what I liked about this
Yes.
whole Harper Daphne stuff is that the first two episodes, like 95% of what we see about Daphne and Cam is like, oh wow, these two, they're both beautiful, they get along, their relationship seems awesome. Um, who wouldn't want a relationship like this? And then in this episode it turns to no one would, in my opinion. Like, I mean, maybe you would if you're into this kind of stuff, but like I'm like, dude, this seems pretty effed up to me. Like and you get the sense that this exterior is hiding something much darker, where Cam sleeps with prostitutes, and Daphne plays these power games with him to like psychologically dominate him. It's just
Mhm.
it's yeah, like I just like that. One thing the show is trying to say, I think, is like things are not always what they seem, right? So anyway.
I think that's very fair. I also think that how to say this very nicely. I think that this show sort of makes those allowances for the wealthy in particular in a
Mm-hmm.
way that I can understand is off-putting to certain people. Like I
Mm-hmm.
do think, if you wanted to take like a purely sort of like devil's advocate, I guess, view of this show, and I think this is what I was trying to say, not very gracefully, is like seemingly from what we've seen of this relationship so far, Daphne is like materially fine,
Yes.
right? Like they are wealthy. She has means, she has resources. Like there is not a situation in which she seemingly like goes to bed like not knowing what's going to happen the next day. Like there's a cocoon of wealth and prestige here
Mm-hmm.
that allows for a certain level of happiness. So I think, you know, that's sometimes I think where criticism comes from of this show is like you're making me feel like empathy and sympathy for these people who have the capacity to be terrible, but at the end of the day, like they're protected by their capital,
Yeah.
and there's nothing to do to change that. So I think that is sort of playing out with this situation. The other thing that is sort of hard for me, and I'm curious where the season goes, is I feel like we have set up a dynamic right now where like all of the men are sort of inherently bad and
Mm-hmm.
all of the women are sort of inherently being preyed upon. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if we get a more complicated sort of like gender binary than that, or like,
Mm-hmm.
cishet roles. Or if we're sort of just saying, if the show is just saying, like, well, all men to a certain degree will take advantage of women, and all women to a certain degree will sort of be harpies and trying to fight back. I don't know, but I'm just
Mm-hmm.
a little worried that all of the relationships seem to be mirroring that so far.
Mm-hmm. Is that the thing you're worried about that you wanted
Yeah,
to mention? Yeah,
that's the thing
gotcha.
I'm worried
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
Yeah, like whether there's going to be a little more variety in how these gender dynamics play out. We'll
Yeah.
see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Couple of other things to mention about the episode before we wrap up. First of all, Daphne does allude to other guys that Cam works with that are really like pure evil, and I'm like,
Right.
dude, Cam seems pretty horrifying already. Personally,
Right.
like, I can't imagine who she's even talking about because they must be really messed up.
Yeah.
But wanted to just mention that, like, he's like the good one of these awful
Right.
people, apparently. Um, there's also a couple of interesting scenes about the male gaze.
Mhm.
The episode opens with Valentina, the hotel manager, walking into a cafe and then shouting down a guy who is kind of flirting with her. There's also a scene later on with Daphne and Harper where they go shopping, and then Daphne steps out for like a split second, and then all of a sudden Harper feels like the looks of dozens of men
Like
converging
a
upon her
swarm of
like a
men everywhere.
swarm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, I thought it's worth noting, what that the show like depicts these scenes. I'm curious, Roxana, if you had any reaction to those.
Well, I think just the scene with Daphne is sort of what furthered my, is this the only read we're going to get of what men do and what women do? Like, are we going to get more than this sense of um, every man is waiting for a woman to be alone so he can take advantage of her? I just want a little bit more than that. But again, I mean, the scene was beautifully shot. Like, we get this very long walk where I believe sound drops out, right? And
Yeah,
we sort
or
of,
yeah.
yeah, we both like pan and tilt, and there are men everywhere. There are men on the stairs above her. There are men waiting out of frame. So I thought it was effective. I'm just hoping that we get maybe something deeper in
Yeah.
episodes to come.
Yeah, and what equally as effective was like how quickly they dispersed
Yeah, they're just
um
gone.
after Daphne comes back. It's just like, oh,
Right.
well, they're going to
Right.
somewhere else. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but I think what you're saying is, um, other than Daphne kind of having this self empowerment ideal, right? Like the show's perspective on men is pretty one-sided so far.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would also argue that Alby seems like a decent dude, but for some reason that is, not a view that you have any sympathy with. But yeah.
I think Ethan is our greatest outlier, except
Yeah,
for, again, I wonder why he's staying on this vacation.
yeah. It
But
could just be
no
social
sympathy
pressure.
for Alby. Absolutely not. No.
Really? Wow.
No.
I would say of the episodes, this one is the one where like he comes off the worst out of the 3
Yeah.
episodes because
Yes.
he's clearly trying to hang out with Porsha when she doesn't want to hang with him anymore. Like that's just,
Right.
like he's not picking up on the cues. So yeah.
No, but I will say again, I do also put, like, as much as it's fun to, complain about Alby, again, I
It's
do
totally
think
fine.
that Porsha is not being honest either,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Porsha should be honest, but I think she is using him as a way to have something to do so she doesn't have to be around Tanya. So they're each using each other to a certain
Mhm.
degree.
Mhm.
Um, I just think it could be it could have a little bit more clarity if Porsha was seemingly more honest and if Alby were more self-aware.
Any
Everybody's
other
bad. That's the message of the show. Everyone sucks.
any other thoughts on season 2 episode 3 of The White Lotus, Roxana?
I don't think so.
All
Think we
right.
covered it.
I enjoyed the episode. Lots going on. Curious to see how this is going to reverberate through the rest of the season. Specifically, how Ethan and Harper are going to handle what happened this episode. Like that's going to
Mhm.
be interesting to how that plays out. A lot of interesting social dynamics. So I'm digging the show. You can find more episodes of this podcast at podcast.decodingtv.com. Email us at decodingtv@gmail.com. Find us on YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter at decodingtv. And if you want to support this show, if you're enjoying this podcast and you're like, hey, I want to make sure stuff like this can happen again in the future, more podcasts like this can happen, more co-hosts, different co-hosts, etc. Not that people don't love the current set of co-hosts. I'm just saying, like, if you want to keep this a going concern, become a member at decodingtv.com. And you can get ad-free episodes as well as exclusive access to bonus episodes and early episodes. So decodingtv.com is where you can support podcasts such as this one. Okay. Roxana Hadadi, where can people find more of your work on the internet this week?
You can find me at Vulture and you can find me on Twitter.
And I already said where you can find all of our stuff at Decoding TV. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week for season 2, episode 4 of The White Lotus. Goodbye.
Bye.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.